So then what determines the value of mortgage debt? Because we know what determines the value of real estate. Real estate is determined by the value of a particular flat or house. It's determined by what are comparable houses and flats, what do they sell for? That determines the value. If it's a commercial property, it's determined differently, where it's determined by the cash flow on the commercial property. But for this example, if we talk about a mortgage note on, say, a property, maybe a residential home, there's six factors that determine the value of a mortgage note. The first factor is the buyer. So if you had a choice between buyers, say you have a property and you're trying to decide who to sell the property to, and you've got one person that is a government employee, and that government employee has a high salary. They've been working for many years for the government. Maybe they work as a post office person. Maybe they deliver packages for the post office, and they've been doing this for 10 years. If the government is their employer, there's a very high probability they're going to get paid on time. But if you have another buyer that says, I'm 24 years old and I just started my new company and I'm just going to make a bunch of money with my company, and they don't have a regular income, but they have a plan where they're going to make money in the future, that sort of buyer is far less desirable. It's better to sell the asset to one that has regular government income, the government employee, or the one that works at some sort of a big corporation. Maybe they work at Microsoft, maybe they work at Google, maybe they work at some big corporation. That buyer is more likely to be able to pay, where they are not going to have cash flow experiences where the things are up or down. The second thing that determines the value is the collateral. So the collateral means the actual asset. So let's say that the property is worth $100,000. Say that's the market value. That's the real value, $100,000. But say that you had a seller that he sold the property with a note for $200,000. Pretend he found somebody who didn't know the prices, and that person agreed to pay $200,000, even though the market value is only $100,000. You have to treat that note differently, because the fact that he found somebody that signed a note and the asset's only worth 100, but he found someone that signed a note for 200 does not make the note worth 200. You could look at that note and you could base it on the value of the collateral. So that's a mistake, is a lot of times people don't look at the collateral, they just look at the value of the debt. And when they see the value of the debt, they may not have properly analyzed what's the collateral worth. The third factor that drives the value is the down payment, the money that the buyer initially paid. So let's say you had two buyers, one that put 30%, 40% of the purchase price, where if it was 100,000, maybe that buyer put down 30,000, 40,000, 30 or 40%. And then say another buyer said, you know what, I want to buy this. I'll pay you the 100,000, but I only have $1,000. I only can put down 1,000. Can you finance 99,000? And the seller agreed. So they both agreed to buy the asset for 100,000, but one of them put down 20,000. Another put down only 1,000. The one that put down the larger down payment is better, because there's less risk of the person saying, you know what, I don't want this. I'm just going to leave. I'm just going to move. I'm just going to, do, because he's got virtually nothing to lose. He lost $1,000, his down payment. But the one that put 20,000 or 30,000 down, he lost a lot more if he walks away from the deal. So that's why you look at the buyer's equity or their down payment or their upfront money. That's an indication of the value. So a buyer that puts down 10% is better than a buyer that puts down 1%. The fourth thing that's important is the actual interest rate. The interest rate on the note. So if you have a note, if you have a mortgage debt that pays 10% or 12%, that is better than a mortgage note that only pays 5% or 4%. So if you had a choice between two notes, two mortgage debts, and the first paid 5% and the second paid 10%, the one that paid 10% is better. The next factor that drives value is the history of the payments. So when you buy these mortgage debts, you want to look at how long has the person been making payments. You want to be careful buying a new note. You want to see a record of how long the person has been making payments. So if a person has a 30-year note, and they are 4 years into a 30-year note, where they still have 26 years left, that is safer if you see a record of payments compared to a 30-year note that the person put the down payment down, but they haven't yet made their first payment. Because what if the person just walks away? What if they don't make that payment? Then you've bought a note that is a non-performing note. You want to buy a performing note. A performing note is more valuable than a non-performing note, because then you don't have any work to do. You just buy the note, and the borrower makes payments to you. So a performing note is better, and the history of performance is important. The next factor that drives value, the sixth factor, is the actual paperwork, the legal paperwork, if it was done properly. Because if you have a note that was just two guys that were sitting around a kitchen table and they worked out a deal and they wrote it up without a lawyer, where they just wrote up an agreement and they signed it, that is less valuable because the note likely has mistakes. They're not lawyers. They just agreed that, yeah, I'll make payments to you for 30 years. Did they remember to put in any of the legal language? Did they know how to put any of the legal language in? These things are important. That type of note is less valuable than a note that had a proper closing at a legitimate company with legitimate lawyers that drafted the paperwork. Because you know that it's very likely that if you buy that note and the borrower doesn't make payments to you, you have legal recourse. You don't want to buy a note that hasn't been drafted properly, that doesn't have proper legal paperwork. So very important there.